Hello everybody, welcome back. Thanks for tuning in to another episode here. My name is Dominic and I'm the host of the Android Factory. Last episode we went ahead and broke apart this UI, kind of talked a little bit about it in relative detail, and explained some of the UI interactions that we have here. Previously it was in our activity main XML file, and now we've actually pulled it out to have, or to be the layout for a particular epoxy model, and in particular this product item kind of idea. So our activity now actually has an epoxy recycler view, and if you can't guess it by now or what the thumbnail had said, we are going to be adding in epoxy to this application so that we can actually display a list of data. If you're unfamiliar with epoxy, I will link a card in the top right from my channel that kind of explains what it is and how it works, and the long and short of it is it's a beautiful wrapper around the recycler view, makes our lives as developers a lot easier, and just affords us some really good things. It kind of also starts to blend the XML system and compose, in my opinion, so it's a good library to know if you're not familiar with it. But as we're getting started here, if you are brand new, please consider subscribing. If you've been enjoying the content so far this season, I'd appreciate a like, and let's just jump right into it here. So adding epoxy in is just like any other old library here. We have defined a particular version, we added our implementation into it, into this Gradle file, and then we do need to just add in this capped, the annotation processing, correct error types true. So that's about it for the build.gradle. There is one other class over here called the view binding Kotlin model. This is kind of something that I've just been, a class that I've been reusing from project to project. If you've been following the channel, you'll understand what it is. But it's basically a wrapper around epoxy model, which is, you could think of that as the view holder in this situation, and then there's an epoxy controller, which you can imagine being the RecyclerView adapter. But this view binding Kotlin model allows us to actually make use of view binding inside of our epoxy models. So again, just making our lives a little bit easier. Okay. So as I mentioned, with epoxy, right, the epoxy recycler view is kind of what we would need to add in at the view level. We're going to attach an epoxy controller to this, and then all of our different items are going to be displayed and used as epoxy models. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into it. Taking a look at the activity here, I kind of trimmed things down a little bit again, right? We're just making a network call and we're printing out the data. We obviously want to use the response from this network call here to build our UI. However, at the moment, this getAllProducts function here just returns a response of a list of any. So basically, we need it to be a response of a list of products. As we bounce over to the JSON here, we can kind of see the different structures here, right? And this is just a single item, a single product item in our list. So I'm actually going to go ahead and just copy this JSON, go back over to our application. I'm going to build a few packages here. All right, so over here I've created a model package, and then within that 3 new packages, domain, mapper, and network. I'm going to go ahead and click on the network one and create a new JSON or a new data class from a JSON snippet. This is just a regular old plugin that you can get, and I think I can actually link a card in the top right to show you how to get that, but it's pretty straightforward. Anyway, you can just paste in JSON here, well-formed JSON, and click format if you want, and it will generate a data class for you based upon the structure of this JSON. Very helpful stuff, very, very, very helpful stuff. So I'm going to actually name this the network product. Go ahead and click generate, and now we'll see that there is a network product here. We've enabled the inner class modeling, so you can kind of see that this data class just literally maps one-to-one to what we had previously, or what was in the JSON. So then within our domain class here, we can do something similar. Where are we? New Kotlin class. We're just going to call this a regular product. Of course, it's going to be a data product, or sorry, a data class. And I simply here just kind of copied over what existed in the network product into the product. Maybe we can remove something like the rating because we don't need that for now. Therefore, we don't need this class. And I think everything else we do need. This is just going to be a slightly dumbed down version of the network model because we just need to care about the data that we actually need. This again is going to just be now our product mapper. which is basically going to contain a single function here. Oops. I typically call it build from, but there's plenty of different names that you can give this function that makes sense when you're coding. I'll show you in a moment. But this is basically going to take a network product and it's going to convert it into a product here, right? And then very simply here we can just do something like this. Perfect. And our mapper is complete now. Basically, we're just filling out a product object here with everything that is contained from the network version of that. And you might be asking, Dom, this seems a little silly, right? We're not actually accomplishing anything. We're just translating network product to product. They look very, very similar. And then you can see here, it's just category equals this dot category, description, this dot description, ID, image, price, title, etc. And while this is a trivial example, a mapper is supposed to provide you that separation between the back end, right, the structure of their data and the structure of your data. Again, this is a simple example, but sometimes in order to get all the data that you need on screen, you need to make 1, 2, 3, multiple network calls, and you need to merge all of that data into one domain object that you care about in order to actually build the UI and have the interactions that you want to have. So, like I said, this is a smaller version, but the idea is there because this provides us a way to basically translate a back-end object into an object that we care about in our code base, which is just a little bit nicer for us because then we're not absolutely tethered to the back-end structure, which just gives you a little bit more flexibility. I'll show you a really quick example here. This price is seen as a double in the JSON because that makes a lot of sense. However, when we deal with numbers and specifically dollar amounts and currency and stuff like that, the big decimal is a pretty good object to kind of use as the backing for that. There are a handful of helper methods and convenience methods that just make life easier, and also manipulating a big decimal. It is an immutable class, so you can't just do big decimal dot add 4, right, like you could do with a double. You would actually need to set that equal to a new big decimal, and so you have a little bit of immutability baked in, which is great. But now obviously the network product.price is a double, and we're trying to tell it, no, we want a big decimal. So what we can very easily do here is we can cut this out, and then we can say big decimal. This will take in a double as part of its constructor. And then the other thing too that we can do is we could say set scale 2, and we'll provide a rounding mode of I believe half up is what we would want. And then this will ensure that our big decimal here has a scale of 2 with the half up idea. So if you go to 5, if the number is 0.128 and you round it this way, it would be 0.13 is what would happen. But the benefit of that is that, this one has 2 decimal places, but this one only has 1, right? And 22.3 does not really make sense for a currency idea. So here we're able to sanitize our data from the back end, ensure we have it in the structure that we want and all that kind of stuff. One really helpful thing that we've done here, because we've set up everything with Hilt, is we can literally annotate this class here with @inject constructor, and now we can use this class anywhere inside of our application that can accept dependency injection, and we're good to go. We are going to make this a network product, and this is get all products, so it's going to return a list of network products. Perfect. And then we're going to go ahead and now we're going to say domain products here is going to be, again, I'll add in our types. It's going to be a list of just product. And that is going to be our response.body. Again, we're not handling errors, so we're just going to non-null assert along the way. We're going to map here. And this map functionality gives you each element in this list here, which is basically a list of network products. This block receives each individual element in that list and asks you to translate it to something else, right? So if we wanted to do, it.id, this would then translate to a list of integers, and we're just mapping, we're just pulling out, if there's 20 products in there, this resulting list here is just going to be a list of the 20 IDs that are associated with all those products. So this map functionality is really, really helpful. But again, we are going to change this. It's going to be a list of products. And as I mentioned, we have our handy dandy ability to inject this stuff in. We're going to ask for our product mapper. And then what we can do very easily is say product mapper dot build from it. And this is what I meant by, this is why I name the function the way I do, because then it kind of reads pretty nicely, right? The product mapper, the idea here is that mapper is appended to the actual name of your domain object. So you can tell that this is an object that is going to create these product classes, and then build from it, where, if we wanted to be really verbose here, we could have network product equals it, right? And now it's very easy to tell what this code is doing by just looking at how this code is written and what it says. It's almost like a sentence, which is super helpful. Okay, perfect. So now we have our domain products. We have a list of products here, and that's super helpful because now we can actually get into adding this to Epoxy, displaying something on the screen, all that good stuff. I'm not going to worry about packaging too much here for this one. We are just going to create the... Alright, we're going to say, because this is going to display products, we're just going to name this the product Epoxy controller. I'm going to make this a class here. And if you've seen the episodes before, you've seen content before, we've used something called just like the Epoxy controller, right? And this gives you the ability to kind of add in whatever data you want. Well, we're going to use something a little bit different here, and we're going to use the typed Epoxy controller, and then this thing asks for a type T, and this is the type of your data that this Epoxy controller is supposed to be working with, right? So you could do something like a string if you really wanted to, but in our case we are going to be using a list of products here, and then there is one function that we need to override here called build models, and now this thing actually already knows the type that is supposed to be passed into this function because of the type that has been declared here. So it's kind of just like a helper. It literally wraps, if we click in, it literally wraps the Epoxy controller, and it just makes your life a little bit easier if you know, you can consolidate one object or one class, to have all your data in, which due to Kotlin sealed classes is actually really interesting because you can build a pretty flexible UI with just technically one type. It seems like they've given us a nullable list here, so that is something that we're going to have to handle. But outside of that, the other benefit here, if we were to just create an instance of this controller, we're going to go with the product Epoxy controller. So it already knows what it actually is, and then from within, when we get our domain products, we can actually just call a function that already exists, set data, with it, which needs a list of products, and then we will just go with domain products. So again, this function is already built out for us. If you're looking into it, it's already implemented inside of our typed Epoxy controller. So there's just some convenience helper methods along the way, and just the general idea, hey, you know what type it is, so we can help you out a little bit. Last thing I'll say about the typed Epoxy controller is that there are a handful of them. You can see typed, type 2, 3, and 4. And then as you see in the constructor here, there is T, TU, TUV, TUVW, and basically allows you to, instead of just specifying one type of data, this one allows you to specify 2, and this one 3, and then this one 4. And then obviously as you have those different parameters, they're going to be given to you in this function here, and then in your set data call, you're going to need to pass all those parameters as well. So again, just the idea of you can tell it what type or how many types, in this case up to 4, and it'll work. Last thing we need to do here is we need to just simply call set controller, and we'll also do the set controller and build models instead. We aren't handling a loading state, but we will soon. So that's it. That's actually all that we need to do for our activity level. create the controller, attach it to the RecyclerView. This is exactly like the creation of an adapter and attaching the adapter to the RecyclerView. And then at some point when we have our data, we simply just set that and then everything works. The very last thing I'll say is that set data internally calls request model build, so you actually don't need to make that call yourself like we were doing previously inside of here. So this actually cleans up our Epoxy implementation a little bit because we don't have to care about managing the list internally here. The typed Epoxy controller can do that for us. So we're going to have a little bit of error handling here. So if our data is null, wow, I don't know what that was, or the data is empty, this will be to do loading state. And then inside of here, we can simply just say data.forEach, and now we have our particular product, right? And we'll actually go ahead and rename it like so. Now we need to go ahead and create the product epoxy model. So inside of here, we are going to do exactly that. The product epoxy model. This is going to be a data class to make use of the equals and hash code functionality so Epoxy can diff properly. We'll create the val product at the moment, and this is, of course, if you've seen it before, going to need to extend the view binding Kotlin model. Now inside here, we need to pass something that extends view binding, and this is how this base layer here actually functions. In our case, we are going to go with the epoxy model product item binding. And then inside of this constructor here, I'll explain this in a hot second, we're just going to do something like this. And then there's one function, the bind. Okay, so this is just, if you've never seen it before, the way that we implement Epoxy with view binding. Pretty standard stuff, been using it for quite a while here. We create our class, we create all of the things that we need. In this case, we're going to take that product object that we've just created. And then there's just a little bit of declaration here, so I'll cover this really quickly. We obviously need to extend something here as an epoxy model. We need to extend an epoxy model. Much like in a view holder situation, you'd need to extend the RecyclerView.viewHolder. We're doing the same thing just in epoxy world. View binding Kotlin model affords us the ability to pass in a particular type of view binding, which obviously gets generated from our layout file. And then inside of our bind function, which you would expect that it would be called in a similar pattern to the view holder bind idea, we can actually act as like an extension function on the binding. So you don't need to find view by ID or do anything like that. You can simply just access your views straight away here and do something like this, product.title, right? And we will just repeat this for the various different things. Okay, and here we have it. So inside of our bind function, we simply just set a handful of text views that we have here, and then in the down here we do just have the same loading logic, except whoops, this should be the product.image. So maybe we can get this all on one line, which there we go, that looks nicer. Okay, perfect. So now we are using this product object that we're being passed in here to programmatically, dynamically set the different attributes for each different model, right? Working exactly the same as a RecyclerView concept. And so within here, inside of the for each, what we can do is we can say product epoxy model. We will pass in the product to the constructor. We'll give it an ID of the product.id and call add to this. And wonderful, that's it. This is it. That is 8 to 17, I mean 10 lines of code, if that, to get this entire, and that has some error handling. There's really just this that displays all of those items on screen. So a much cleaner implementation than the RecyclerView adapter situation. So yeah, I think that's about it. We haven't set up all our listeners yet, just because handling listeners and on clicks and stuff like that inside of RecyclerView is a little bit tricky, and I don't want to make this video too long. I learned something new today. We have a crash here, and the error here, you cannot call request model build directly, call set data to trigger a model refresh. I was looking at this code and I was like, we are calling set data. I am not calling request model build. The problem here was that calling set controller and build models, which does exactly that, right? It sets the controller and then it calls request model build. Apparently that doesn't work with our typed epoxy controller, so we will just call set controller instead. And now as the app is booting up here, let's see if the network call comes back. And there we go. Things kind of loaded in pretty nicely there. Ooh, I forgot to put the price on there. But yeah, now we have a scrolling list of content. We even have, look at that. Look at that with that loading spinner on the items. I mean, that is just incredible. Okay, let me clean a few things up here. Okay, we are coming back here, running things again, cleaned up a handful of things. So let's see as this loads. Yep, perfect. So, yeah, wonderful. Seems like the images are cached, so they're not taking any time to load. Again, we don't have any of the on clicks or anything like that working, but we do have a pretty clean UI here. Scrolling lists of content, really, really good stuff coming from the back end, and all of our prices and all the data is there. Yeah, I'm going to cut it here. If you made it this far in the video, I'd really appreciate a like. Thank you for following along. Let me know how I'm doing in the comments section. And I will catch you guys in the next one, where we're just going to continue building out this list here, bring back those UI interactions, and then maybe we'll get into a little bit of an architecture discussion, because right now we are just making a network call, not really all in the activity. We don't have fragments set up, we don't have anything, so we have a lot of work to do in that regard. But for now, it's looking great. I hope you guys think so as well, and I'll catch you in the next one. Thanks.